Imagine a place that exists purely in the grammar of what if.
Oh, I love that phrasing.
Right. It's not a physical location you can just, punch into your GPS. It's not in Tokyo. It's not in London. It's not even in the past or the future.
It's what the source material we're looking at today calls the Museum of Impossible Conversations.
Exactly. Welcome to today's deep dive. We're stepping into this museum, which is described as existing in the subjunctive mood.
The subjunctive mood.
Yeah.
It's a space dedicated entirely to history that never actually happened.
Yeah, conversations cut short by death, by distance, or just the sheer bad timing of life. It's this infinite gallery of missed connections.
And today, we are walking into one very specific room in that museum to unpack a text titled The Plath Akutagawa TRIPTYCH.
It is a creative, imagined meeting between two absolute titans of literature who never met in reality.
Right. On one side of the table, you have Sylvia Plath, the American poet, who really defined a generation's understanding of confessional writing and who died by suicide in 1963.
And sitting across from her is Ryūnosuke Akutagawa, essentially the father of the modern Japanese short story. The Akutagawa Prize is literally named after him. He died by suicide in 1927.
Separated by nearly 40 years.
Thousands of miles.
And a massive language barrier. But this text dissolves all of that and puts them in a room together.
And the setting described for this room is just, well, it's incredibly vivid. It's not some white, sterile, clinical space.
No, not at all. It's highly tailored to them. The text describes a space that accommodates their very specific rituals.
For Plath, there are cigarettes.
Yes, she needs them to keep her hands busy, to have that top-tile grounding.
And for Akutagawa, there is tea. Because for him, the ritual of preparing and drinking tea offers a kind of structural integrity, especially when his internal world is completely falling apart.
And the lighting in this room is specifically mentioned too. It's described as clear but not interrogating.
Not interrogating. I think that's a really crucial distinction for us to make right out of the gate here.
Absolutely. This isn't a trial. The source makes it perfectly clear that the purpose of this impossible conversation isn't to judge them.
Or to magically solve the mystery of their deaths.
Right, or to offer a cure. It's simply to witness. They are there to articulate the indescribable, to map out the specific textures of the mental states that push them to the very edge.
Which is incredibly difficult because, by definition, those states defy language. That's usually why people suffer in silence. There just aren't words for it.
But these are two of the greatest writers who ever lived. If anyone can find the words,
it's them.
That's the hope. And we should probably echo the disclaimer from our source text right now. This deep dive doesn't offer easy answers.
No, we aren't going to wrap this up with a neat little bow on how to be happy.
This is honest testimony from two artists at the absolute extremity of human experience. It's heavy, but it is profoundly illuminating.
So let's walk up to the first part of this triptych. The source calls it Panel 1. It really focuses on the metaphors they use to describe their pain.
And with Plath, everyone assumes they already know the metaphor. We've all heard of the bell jar. It's iconic.
It is, but what's fascinating in this conversation is that Plath actively pushes back against the idea of it being a metaphor at all.
She insists it's a literal physical experience.
That part really struck me. She describes it as something that descends over you. You don't climb into a jar, the jar comes down on top of you.
And she gets very specific about the glass itself. It's not clean, clear, modern glass.
No, she describes it as old, thick glass, full of bubbles and imperfections. It's incredibly heavy.
And the most crucial thing about the bell jar is the distortion it causes. It's not a blindfold. You can see out.
Right. She talks about seeing people walking down the street, seeing the blue sky of the free world, seeing her friends living these vibrant, normal lives.
But she can't touch any of it.
And there's the preservation aspect, too. A bell jar is literally used to preserve dead things in a lab or, to keep dust off an antique clock. It creates a vacuum.
She talks about the air inside being stale, just rebreathing her own sour air over and over again.
Exactly. And when she tries to communicate with the outside world, the glass muffles everything. She screams, "I am suffocating."
But the people outside just see her mouth moving. They hear this faint buzz, and they interpret it as, "Oh, I'm a little sad today."
It's the sheer torture of being entirely visible, but totally inaccessible.
Now, Akutagawa is listening to all of this in the text, and his reaction is really fascinating.
Because you'd fully expect him to say, yes, exactly, me too.
But he doesn't. He shakes his head. He tells her he didn't have a jar.
His experience was fundamentally different. He uses the phrase, bonyari shitafuan.
Which is usually translated into English as vague anxiety.
Yeah, but the source text digs into why that translation is actually a massive failure.
It really is. In English, vague sounds trivial. It sounds like a vague headache or a vague sense that you forgot to lock the door. It sounds minor.
But Akutagawa explains that banyari means formless or nebulous. It's much closer to a dense fog or a cosmic haze. It's an anxiety without a specific object.
And because it has no object, it can't be fought.
Okay, so I'm trying to really wrap my head around this difference for you, the listener. Plath has a jar, right? A hard barrier. Akutagawa has a fog. Is it just a difference of weather?
Think of it more in terms of boundaries. Plath suffered from too much boundary, that thick glass wall she was crushed up against.
Okay.
Akutagawa suffered from a total lack of boundaries. He calls his version of the trap the room with no walls.
The room with no walls. That sounds like a paradox. If there are no walls, couldn't you just walk right out?
That is exactly the trap. He explains that having walls actually gives you a sense of geography. You know where here ends and there begins.
Right, there's a reference point.
But his anxiety removed all the landmarks. Imagine you're standing in a thick gray fog. You can walk a mile in literally any direction, but your view never ever changes.
You are always standing in the exact center of the exact same gray circle.
Precisely. It's an unplace. You can't fight it because there's absolutely nothing to hit. If you're afraid of a tiger, you can run from it or fight it.
But if you are afraid of everything and nothing all at once?
That's the room with no walls.
So Plath has a barrier she can't break through, and Akutagawa has a boundlessness he can't grasp.
Yet the result is completely identical. Absolute isolation. Whether you are trapped by compression or trapped by infinity, you are still completely alone.
It makes a lot of sense then why they were both so incredibly prolific as writers. I mean, if you felt trapped in a jar or lost in a fog, you'd probably try to build something just to prove you still exist.
They certainly tried. The source frames this next section as art as containment. They basically compare notes on how they use their writing to survive.
It's almost like they were frantically building life rafts.
Or cages for the beast. Plath talks about using her poems to create edges. Her internal world was chaotic, spilling over, completely messy.
So a poem.
Right, a poem with 30 lines, strict meters, sharp rhymes. That was a way to force the chaos into a shape.
If you read Lady Lazarus or Daddy, they feel exactly like that. They're sharp, they're angry. It feels like she's cutting the pain into manageable little squares just so she can handle it.
That's a perfect way to describe it. She was trying to impose order through structure. Akutagawa, on the other hand, used logic. He wrote stories like Kappa.
Kappa is such a wild story. It's the satire about a man who goes to this land of water demons, right?
Yes, and in the land of the Kappa, everything is inverted. Their society has totally different rules, but the key is that they do have rules.
Ah, I see.
Akutagawa explains in our source that he wrote these intricate stories to build a world that operated on logic, because his own mind felt like it had lost all logic.
He was trying to construct a reality that made sense to counter the fog.
Exactly. And the distinct ways they wrote are telling, too. Plath wrote using I. It was confrontational. Lady Lazarus is a deeply personal, I do this, I feel this.
Whereas Akutagawa wrote using he.
Yes, distancing himself.
Yeah.
Using characters and avatars to filter the experience.
But the truly heartbreaking part of this conversation in the text is when they look at each other across that table and just admit that it didn't work.
No, it worked for the art. The art is immortal.
Oh.
But it didn't work for the artist.
Plath has this incredibly visceral line where she says writing was like bailing out a sinking ship with a teaspoon. The madness just spawned faster than she could write it down.
That image of the teaspoon is devastating. You can work as hard as humanly possible. You can write the defining poem of the century, but the water is still rushing in.
And this leads them directly into discussing the burden of performance, because we really have to remember they weren't visibly falling apart in the street.
They were high-functioning. They were wildly successful. Plath was winning awards. Akutagawa was a major literary celebrity in Japan.
But the source suggests that the success actually made the bell jar worse. Plath describes feeling like a performing bear.
Exactly. The more successful she became, the more she felt she was a complete fraud. She felt she had to hide the suffocation just to maintain the image of the brilliant poetess.
She couldn't let the mask slip for a second.
And for Akutagawa, the fog made every single interaction a terrifying performance of normalcy. He talks about having to monitor every word, every facial expression, just to pass as sane.
Imagine the sheer energy that takes. To be constantly calculating, am I smiling correctly right now? Is this how a normal person responds to a joke?
And on top of that, The source describes as anhedonia, the total loss of pleasure.
He says food tasted like ash.
And the world looked wrong, like the colors were entirely muted and sounds were distant. So you're navigating this gray, tasteless world while pretending to be vibrant and fully engaged.
The exhaustion of that is just unimaginable.
It really paints a clear picture of why they reached their breaking points. It wasn't simply sadness. It was a physical, literal inability to keep lifting that massive weight day after day.
Which brings us to panel 2 of the triptych. The source calls it the logic of the end.
This is the part of the deep dive where we really need to tread carefully. The text talks about what it calls the terrible mercy of clarity.
The terrible mercy.
Yes. For Akutagawa, the vagueness became clear for just a brief moment. And in that singular moment of clarity, he saw only one exit from the room with no walls.
And Plath describes her decision not as some wild, impulsive panic attack, but as a necessary conclusion, like she was just checking the final box on a long list.
But then we have to talk about the children.
Yeah. This is, without a doubt, the hardest part of the text to read. Plath had a daughter who was 3 and a son who was barely 1. Akutagawa had 3 young sons.
From the outside, just looking at the history books, it's so easy to judge. You almost want to scream at the text. How could you possibly leave them?
It's a completely natural reaction, but the source material asks us to suspend that judgment for a moment and look at the logic of the illness.
This is the crucial point. They didn't leave despite their children. In a deeply warped, tragic way, they left for them.
This goes back to the distortion we talked about earlier, doesn't it? The glass warping the view.
Exactly. Akutagawa describes himself as a father in name only. Because of the thick fog, he literally couldn't feel joy when he held his sons. He felt like a ghost haunting his own house.
He genuinely believed his sons would be better off without this hollow shell of a man casting a permanent shadow over their lives.
He thought he was removing a contagion.
And Plath. The details of her final morning. She prepared their breakfast. She left milk and bread out for them. She went to the trouble of taping the cracks in the door to seal their room, to protect them from the gas.
That detail always breaks me, because it shows the absolute war happening in her mind. The mother in her was trying desperately to protect them from the suicide, while the illness was convincing her that the suicide was the only way to save them from her.
She thought she was a performing mother, a fake. She thought the only honest, pure thing she could give them was her absence.
But here's where this impossible conversation allows for something truly profound. In this afterlife meeting, sitting in this museum, they both finally admit they were wrong.
They do. It's easily the most powerful moment in the entire text. They look at the wreckage of their choices, and they admit the illness lied to them.
Plath cries over the fact that her children lost her. She realizes that leaving milk and bread wasn't enough.
And Akutagawa admits he didn't even write letters to his children because the fog prevented him from feeling the love he knew he should feel. He thought a clean break was better.
But looking back, with the clarity of the museum, they acknowledge that any version of them, even a broken, deeply depressed version, would have been infinitely better for their children than the silence they left behind.
It's an incredibly heavy realization. It obviously doesn't change history, but it entirely changes the testimony. They aren't justifying the act anymore, they are mourning it.
We walk through their final mornings in the text.
Akutagawa took barbiturates while reading the Bible, interestingly enough. He describes feeling a gentle dimming.
And Plath used the gas oven. She describes feeling the relief of the struggle finally ending. And the authors of our source text emphasize strongly that recounting these details isn't a warning, and it certainly isn't an encouragement. It is simply testimony.
They are saying, this is what happened, this is exactly how it felt, this is the flawed logic we used.
Which brings us to the final part of the triptych. We've had the panel of the jar, and we've had the panel of the room, and then just white space. Panel 3.
Panel 3 is completely blank.
It represents the silence between suicides. The source explains that the conversation fundamentally has to end because words eventually fail.
You can describe the bell jar, you can map out the room with no walls, but the actual experience of the end itself crosses a threshold where language simply cannot follow.
The source suggests that this profound silence is where the reader, or for you listening to us right now, the listener, enters the frame.
Because the silence isn't empty. It holds the work that wasn't written. It holds the lives unlived.
It's a space of pure ambiguity. The silence doesn't judge them. It doesn't loudly declare what they did was right or wrong. It just holds the stark reality of it.
The source visualizes this entire triptych hanging in a gallery, And this third blank panel acts essentially as a mirror.
A mirror. Because when you stand in front of a giant blank white panel in a museum, what do you actually see?
You see your own reflection?
Yes. You see yourself. You see the room behind you. You see the other people standing there looking at it with you.
And the source mentions a lot of other people in that room.
It lists an entire gallery of those who found life unbearable. Virginia Woolf, David Foster Wallace, Hemingway, Kawabata. It's a very crowded room.
And the point the source drives home is that from inside the jar, the question, should they have done it, doesn't exist. That's a question for people on the outside. Inside, there was only the desperate need to stop the pain.
So we have to ask, what does this all mean? Why does this Museum of Impossible Conversations even exist? Why put us through this emotional wringer?
I think the core insight here really comes back to testimony. These two geniuses couldn't save themselves. Art couldn't save them. Love couldn't save them.
But this imagined conversation allows them to do something they couldn't do in life. They get to witness each other.
That is such a powerful idea. Plath validating Akutagawa's formless fog, and Akutagawa validating Plath's crushing glass jar.
Even if it changes absolutely nothing about the past, it changes how we see them now. They aren't just statistics or tragedies. They are real people who fought incredibly hard against impossible physics.
Exactly. They offer their experience so that others might feel seen. It's like a hand reaching out from that blank panel saying, I know what that room looks like. I know exactly what the stale air in that jar tastes like.
The source leaves us with a final thought that I think is really important to hold on to. The conversation in the museum ends, the speakers fade away, but the triptych remains. And the blank panel asks something of the living.
It asks us to continue, to find the door they could not find.
They aren't saying don't do it in a preachy, moralizing way. They're saying, we reached a door we couldn't open. We really hope you find the key we lost.
That lands so hard. It's not a command, it's a wish. We couldn't make it, but we hope you do.
It is. And for anyone listening who might be standing in that room or suffocating under that jar, the existence of this conversation proves that the experience is shared. You aren't the only one who has seen the fog.
And that actually brings me to something I was thinking about while we were prepping this deep dive. Something not explicitly in the text, but that builds right off of it.
Oh, what's that?
Well, we've been talking about this museum as a place for the dead, a place for history that never happened. But what if the museum isn't just for the dead?
What do you mean?
What if we're all walking around with our own invisible jars in our own rooms with no walls right now? I mean, maybe the real impossible conversation isn't the one between two dead authors from different centuries.
It's the one we're failing to have with the people sitting right next to us.
Exactly. The person next to you on the train, your coworker, your friend. If we can imagine Plath and Akutagawa reaching across the void to understand each other's pain, maybe we should try reaching across the table while we're still here to do it.
To be the mirror for someone else before it becomes a blank panel.
Exactly. Well, that was a deep dive into some very heavy but incredibly beautiful waters. We'll leave you with that image of the blank third panel filled not with darkness, but with your own reflection and your own breath. Thanks for listening.
Take care, everyone.